My name's Chris and I repair my own audio equipment, and I also show you how to repair yours. So let's get started. An open inrush current resistor, wiring errors on the amp assembly, incorrect Zener diodes in the power supply, a totally broken shaft on the oscilloscope level control, a partially broken shaft on the selector switch, a broken dial lamp housing, and a burned out stereo lamp. And this was just the beginning of my troubles. Do I have a bad transformer? Please don't have a bad transformer. Well, I never thought I was going to get a second Marantz 2500, but here it is. And it had a whole different set of issues compared to my first one, including the need for epoxy and tape. So let's get started. If you haven't already, please subscribe. When I obtained this 2500, the only thing I knew about it was that when you powered it up, the fan ran, but that was it. That's the only thing I knew. And from working on another 2500 and being a little bit familiar with their problems, the first thing I did was to take my multimeter and to check the 10 ohm 10 watt soft start resistor, and sure enough it was wide open. So at that point, why was that open? And sometimes it's because of that power transformer that I talked about in my first Marantz 2500 video, that the power transformer fails and then it takes out this 10 ohm 10 watt resistor, and then the fan in the unit almost acts like a dim bulb tester, and it takes all the current through the fan with this resistor open. So that makes sense why I was told that the only thing that happens is the fan runs. I didn't even try it because I knew if I checked out this 10 ohm resistor and it were open, that's what it was going to do. I know I've got to replace that resistor before I even try it. So I went ahead and ordered a 10 ohm 25 watt replacement resistor instead of the 10 watt resistor that was in there. And at the same time, I ordered two more 25 watt resistors that work to control the fan speed and to replace the 680 ohm 10 watt resistor that's in it at the moment. These are mods that people learned 20 years ago is a good idea in a Marantz 25 or 2600. As you guys know, I'm a hobbyist. I'm not smart enough to know if I need a 5 watt resistor or a 500 watt one in the circuit, but I am smart enough to do my own research and to look at what other people who are smart enough to figure it out say. And pretty much everybody says on a Marantz 25 or 2600, this particular circuit, those resistors should be bumped up to somewhere around a 25 watt rating. But I'll tell you, my other Marantz 2500, I didn't have an issue with that circuit at all, and I never touched it. One day maybe I will get in there and upgrade it, but not all of them fail. Kind of like the power transformers. They don't all fail, and either do these power resistors all fail in every 2500. As I just mentioned, I had to replace two power resistors in the 2500, and I upgraded them to a higher wattage. I went from 10 watt to 25 watt. Well, the 25 watt replacement resistors were too big to mount where the 10 watts were. So I had to come up with a solution to that. And what I used were old school wiring terminals. These were used years ago in electronics when there was a lot of point-to-point wiring, and boy do they come in handy for situations like this. By squeezing the terminal lugs a little bit with your pliers, these power resistors fit perfect. These really work out great for mounting components. They have screw holes already in them, so you can mount them into your chassis easily, just like I did. These are the old power resistors, and here are the new upgraded power resistors. Now, where can you get these wiring terminals? I really don't know. I got mine several years ago at an electronic surplus store. They just had a big barrel of them. I picked up a handful. I wish I would have taken the whole barrel full. I've used them so much. My only other suggestion would probably be eBay or somewhere like that you could find them. Or maybe you guys know that you can buy them online somewhere. I don't know. Or something similar. If you do, put it down in the comments to help other people find them. I also installed a new soft start relay. I ordered that when I went ahead and ordered the new resistors. Like most vintage audio parts, they're still available at DigiKey or Mauser, so don't let anybody tell you that you can't get parts for this equipment. Most of the parts you can still obtain. So now with the new resistors mounted and installed back into the chassis along with the new relay, I don't see any reason not to power it up. I've looked it over and I'm going to give it a shot. So the fan's running on high speed, and the soft start relay never went. When I heard that fan go loud, I was like, oh no, I hope the transformer's not bad. Because if I talk to you guys about that transformer, they're known to go bad in 2500s and 2600s. Do I have a bad transformer? Please don't have a bad transformer. So I'm just at this point going, now what? And as you can see, I have a dim bulb tester here to prevent any type of damage from the unit drawing too much current. So what I'm going to do here is to see who's causing the unit not to power up. I'm going to pull the power from the power amp assembly, because a lot of times that will be the area that will cause the unit to draw too much current. Not too much else in here can do that other than the power transistors. If they short out or something like that, then you end up having a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and let me look in here with my light. It's J6 for the left channel and J7 for the right. So I'm going to pull both of these off. And if you ever try this, just make sure you don't short that against something that you shouldn't. I'm just going to leave them hanging here. Try to. That one just about went back against the chassis, which will, if not kill me, it'll scare me anyway. All right, so now I've got the power disconnected from the regulated power supply to the power amplifier section. So if it's something to do with that, it should power up. Power won't work, obviously, but it should be able to go through its startup sequence of relays. So let's see what happens. I'm using a dim bulb tester, as I said, and to save my power switch a little bit, I just leave the power switch on. I just got to be a little careful of that when I get done with the dim bulb tester. If I just turn the power on, you don't hear anything because I haven't turned on the dim bulb tester. So now I'm going to flick him on. So here we go. Let's see what happens. Oh, you hear the click? And the speaker relay went. Oh, and now the fan's running high. When I heard those relays go, both the soft start relay and the speaker relay, I thought I was golden. Click, click, and then the fan runs on high. What is that all about? Just want to stop here a second. Did you guys notice the dim bulb tester, when I turned it on, how bright that light bulb got, that is the inrush current that 10 ohm resistor takes for that split second while those big filter capacitors are charging. And then did you see when the soft start relay went, when you heard that click, that bulb immediately went almost dim. And that's what you would expect. And I thought I was good to go. I knew I had the power amp unhooked, but I was real surprised when I heard the fan running loud again. So I kind of paused and like, what is that all about? So here we go. Let's see what happens. Oh, you hear the click? And the speaker relay went. Oh, and now the fan's running high. On one hand, I'm really happy because for the receiver to have gotten through its startup, that means there's a very good chance that the transformer's good. So that tells you that there's something wrong with the power amplifier. Probably, right, the most common thing that could cause this is shorted power transistor somewhere. You know, there's not too much else here. Even if you had something else failing in this area, it wouldn't cause the amplifier to draw too much current. You know, you could have a bad transistor here anywhere else pretty much. Or, you know, and it's just not going to cause it from not powering up. It may not work or sound good, but it's not going to do what it's doing right now. So the most likely suspects are in here. It's one of these power transistors or several of the power transistors. Who knows? One thing I found out about this unit initially was I could tell someone's worked on it before. Several of the assemblies had components changed out. Looked like somebody maybe started a restoration or did a restoration. I don't know. I could tell that a lot of the parts were not original. Now, some of the assemblies weren't touched. The power amp assemblies don't look like those were ever touched at all. So I said they weren't touched at all. Well, that's not exactly correct. What I did was I thought I better check the wiring on this power amp assembly to see if it's wired up correctly, because I knew something was up with it because I pulled the rails off of both the left and right channel. Not only did I check the wiring because I knew other people had been in this unit before I got a hold of it, what also bothered me was that I wasn't blowing any fuses. So normally, if you have output transistors bad, like I was talking about a couple minutes ago, you're going to blow fuses. You're going to blow the line fuse. You're going to blow fuses on the P800 regulated power supply card that protect these various circuits and also protect your house from burning down in case something happens. I had no issues with any of the fuses blowing. And as you saw, the unit tried to start up. So I know something was wrong there, and the fan was running on high still. I didn't know what that was about. So I had my pictures from my original 2500 restoration and repair, and I just looked at the pictures that I have. And the right power amp assembly was wired up wrong. Somebody'd been in there, taken them off, put them back on, and they put them on incorrectly. I knew that because I could just look at the old pictures. Now the left side was hooked up correctly, but the right side wasn't. So my old pictures are what saved me. Now, could I have figured that out? Probably would have, but it would have taken me more time because I wouldn't have been looking at that first, thinking that somebody wired it back up wrong, but they did. I moved the wires where they needed to go. Fortunately, it didn't get blown up. They wired it up incorrectly, and all it did was not work. That was just so fortunate because I rewired it. I put the wires back where they're supposed to go. With the amplifier assembly attached, I powered it back up, and what do you know? It was fine. Went ahead and went through its power up sequence, both the relays went, and the fan just sat there and ran on low. I now thought I was to the point where I could hook up a pair of test speakers and give it a try. The phono section seemed to work fine, both left and right channels. I hooked a CD player up into the auxiliary port, that seemed to work, but the AM/FM tuner section, deader than a doornail. So that's the next issue that I'm going to take a look at. As I've talked to you before, always check the voltage when you have a situation like this. as I indicated, the phono works, auxiliary works, both channels work, but the tuner section doesn't work. So the first thing to do is to check the voltage going to the tuner section. And in this case, going from the P800 power supply to the tuner card is positive 13 volts and negative 13.9. I measured those right at the power supply, and I measured positive 7 volts and negative 7 volts, which is about half of what I'm supposed to have. So that may not be the only problem, but that's certainly a problem. And now I need to take a look at the P800 power supply and see what's going on there. See, here I can see where someone has replaced these 3 Zener diodes. And when I was measuring, I had 7.1 volts. These Zener diodes provide voltage to the tuner card, and they're providing what they're made to provide, 7 volts. The problem is it should be 14. Why there were 7 volt Zener diodes replaced, I can't tell you. But you can always tell when somebody's worked on a board, I don't care how good you are, that these Zener diodes weren't original, because I can see the difference in the soldering between when it was flow soldered at the factory 50 years ago and today. So I'm going to replace those 7 volt Zeners with what should be in there, 14s, and let's see what happens. For Zener diodes, I have a piece of test equipment that's very handy. It's an Atlas Zen, which is a Zener diode analyzer. I just removed the 7 volt Zener. I know it's 7 volts because I measured it when it was in the power supply board in the 2500. But if I had this diode out, I cannot see this at all. There's markings on it. My eyes aren't what they used to be. I really couldn't tell what this is for sure. This little device, it's just got two alligator clip leads. You just clip right onto it, and you guys may be able to see this, you may not. It says VZ equals 7.41 volts. So that's telling you it's a 7 volt Zener. Now the replacement that I'm going to be putting in, look at this guy if you can see him at all. He is extremely tiny, and they're both half watt, by the way. This circuit requires a 500 millivolt Zener diode. So this one I'm holding in my hand is actually rated at a half a watt. It is very difficult. I mean, I couldn't read this one. This one here is about a third its size. There's no way I could read this, even when I was probably 20 years old. So I'm going to just measure it. I just got it out of the bag, and I'm sure it's correct, but I'm going to just show you here that now I can measure this one. Turn my guy on here. And sure enough, 13.84 volts. So we know that's a 14 volt Zener. But really where this comes in handy is to verify what I thought. They were 7 volt Zeners because I measured it. And also when you've got Zener diodes that you just can't see. After installing the 14 volt Zeners into the P800 power supply and then reinstalling the power supply back into the chassis, I now have that right around 14 volts that I need for the tuner section. Well, it was time to give the tuner a shot again, and both AM and FM worked great. They sounded great, so that was the whole issue. The whole issue was somebody had put the wrong components in. And with this old equipment, a lot of people have worked on them a lot of times before you get your hands on them, so you never know what you're going to find. It's the first time I've ever found something like that, but may not be the last. With that problem behind me, it's time to move on with the repair and restoration of this 2500. Now with the tuner issue behind me, and from earlier testing, knowing that the phono works and the auxiliary port works with a CD player, both channels seem to be balanced, and I let it sit here a couple hours and just listen to a little bit of FM, and it sounded fine. Now I've got a couple cosmetic issues that I want to show you how I approach those. So I had to get the faceplate off, and I ran into a little issue there. Someone had glued the balance control knob knob onto the shaft, so that was a problem. I didn't want to grip this with anything other than my fingers, like a pair of pliers, because it's a piece of plastic, and guess what's going to happen? It's going to bust. So you can use a little piece of cardboard. I put it down in between the faceplate and the knob so you don't mar the faceplate. And then I was able to get a screwdriver down in there and be able to get some leverage on it to pry it loose. Popped right on off. So I just wanted to share that with you. The level control for the oscilloscope, the shaft is busted right off. The knob's gone, but the shaft's gone too. It was snapped right in half. And that's a lot bigger issue than just missing the knob. So what can you do about a situation like this? Because you can't call Marantz and have them send you a new control for your oscilloscope. So you go to the garage and you start digging around. How about looking in the $5 Big Lots do-it-yourself mechanic hardware kit? Let's see what we can find there. Hey, this looks promising. Let's try this. I thought the hook matched up just about size-wise with what was remaining of the shaft, so I cut the hook in half with a Dremel tool, and then I took the threaded end and fit it against what was remaining of the shaft just to see if it was a good match, and it was just about exact. Now it's too long, and I'm going to have to cut that part down also. Before I can cut the shaft to the length I need to find a knob, because I don't have the knob either. So I'm using a JVC equalizer knob that is much longer than the original knob. So I'm going to have to cut the shaft, but I'm also going to have to cut the knob. So I'm going to have to make some measurements so that when I've cut the knob and I've cut the shaft, that the new shaft and knob are even with the rest of the knobs on the Marantz 2500. With the JVC knob cut to size, I found that the plastic insert in the JVC knob I thought would work with my new shaft. So I went ahead and I used some JB Weld epoxy. I took my new shaft and attached it to what was left of the shaft that was broke off on the 2500. I then took a file and I had to take a little bit of that shaft off and to kind of taper it down slightly, because my idea was to be able to screw this new knob onto my new shaft. So it took a little bit of time to do this. I didn't want to take too much material off at a time with the file, so I'd file a little bit, try the knob, not quite there, a little bit more material, because I wanted it to be able to screw on, but I didn't want it loose to fall off. But sometimes this is what you got to do if you don't have the parts you need. And one thing for sure, it's a lot better than the one I had, which was none at all. These are the type of issues you run into with vintage audio equipment. Cosmetic issues, you usually have to do some sort of a custom fix like this. As I mentioned, you can't call Marantz and get the parts any longer. Another issue I had was when I was removing the knobs, the selector knob, when I pulled it off, it came off, but it came off in two pieces. One half of the shaft stayed in the unit, and the other half of the shaft was still in the knob. So I had to repair that. That was a little bit easier of a repair than the level control on the scope, because I did have half of it, so that was nice. Another issue I had when I removed the faceplate, some of the little plastic spacers that are normally glued onto the faceplates of vintage audio equipment, some of those were loose and they were still around the buttons in the chassis. I went ahead and used some contact cement and glued those back into the faceplate like they should be. The stereo indicator bulb was burned out. Not unusual. The unit's almost 50 years old. What do you expect? Most bulbs are gonna have gone bad by then, and this one had. And in the stereo bulb's case, I always change these out with LEDs. Sometimes I don't change out the dial lamps with LEDs, even though in this unit, someone had already changed them out with LEDs, and it looks good. And that's the whole key. If it looks good to you, then you keep it. So I'm about 50-50 on LEDs. But whenever I have to change out a bulb like the stereo indicator, I always use an LED to replace it. Another problem is the dial lamp housing itself. The plastic housing is broke, where you would normally have a screw on each end where the assembly that contains the dial lamps will screw down into this plastic piece. and it's broken on both ends. There are replacement ones available, reproductions that you can buy, the housing, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to use a little bit of double-sided tape and put it along the edge, and that will hold that assembly in there just fine. It's not going to go anywhere. But this is another example of a workaround that you may be able to do with your piece of equipment. When you have an issue, there's usually a way to get around whatever problem you've got. An open inrush current resistor, wiring errors on the amp assembly, incorrect Zener diodes in the power supply, a totally broken shaft on the oscilloscope level control, a partially broken shaft on the selector switch, a broken dial lamp housing, and a burned out stereo lamp. This is why I love working on this equipment, because every single unit is different. This 2500 didn't have any of the issues my first 2500 had, and it's so interesting for me to get in there, figure out a way to repair these units. As you saw in this video, sometimes it takes glue, sometimes it takes tape. What you end up with is a Marantz 2500 that will definitely outlive me. I would not be surprised if this 2500 is not making music 100 years from now. Don't forget to check out my original Marantz 2500 video. There's a lot of good stuff in there, totally different issues than what you saw in this video. And I'd really appreciate it for you guys out there who haven't subscribed, just subscribe. And as I always say, thank you so much to my present subscribers. Y'all have a good day.